Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Hello, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram, and I'd like to thank you for joining me this episode of the World Builder's Anvil. And now today, I'm very excited to talk about the technology breakdown. This is important to think about because you want to know at the time that your world is being delivered to people what the technology is. And understanding that, you have to think about what are the impacts of the rules of my universe upon that. So to get right into it, let's just talk about the idea of technology and technology over time, really. And I have to thank Steve Jackson Games and GURPS because the way I think about it was very much pulled in from their idea of tech level. Mine's been modified a little bit more or a little differently or whatever to make sense to me specifically. However, GURPS is actually a wonderful system to look at if you're trying to build a world because they give you a lot of things to think about. And so the way I break it down is Stone Age is first level of technology that becomes interesting in storytelling. It's this idea that you're starting to actually think and create tools to make your situation in the world better. You're probably starting to farm or you're at the cusp of it. And then after you go into the Stone Age, there are usually other ages. And in Earth, we talk about the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. Both of those are important too, because it's showing that you're starting to take more from the natural world around you and utilizing those to make better tools to try and make the society a stronger, better place. And then from there, in Earth terms, you have the medieval era. Is this idea of, well, we're making pretty decent tools now, but you're really starting to see cultures evolve a little bit more. And don't think of it in terms of dark ages necessarily. A dark age is really a period of time where science is either moved backwards and has to catch back up like in Earth's, or maybe science just becomes very stagnant for a long period of time. And you'll see this a lot if you have megalithic societies. Sometimes technology will get stuck in them, and then they'll have a societal breakdown and new technology will come up and another society will come up beyond it. You see this a lot in China where between the different dynasties, a lot of times you'll have these periods where the empire is still technically there, but it breaks down and then there'll be some new technological advancements. And from there, a new empire will form up that is still China, but is a different dynasty usually. It'll transition technically at that point to the new dynasty. The Renaissance level era, which is really sort of where the idea of humanism starts working in. Society has advanced enough to where there's enough excess goods that you're really beyond the development of basic societies that are usually very family-based into this idea that's starting to form up at this point of nation states. You go from there, there's the pre-industrial technological level. This level is interesting because this is when a lot of things start becoming mechanized. You might have a steampunk world that is sort of pre-industrial, moving into industrial, but instead of using our thoughts and norms for industrial, you're using this steampunk technology. Then from there, I like to think about it as the industrial era. It's the era where industry is full in swing. Your cottage industries, if they still exist, are in very small, newer facets of the economy. And older facets of the economy, whenever technology becomes available, you start seeing assembly lines for cars and assembly lines for delivering packages. And each industry will take a different length of time to get there. But when you're pretty much in full swing industrial society, most things are probably mechanized at some point. Then once things become mechanized, you get more excess goods, and then you start moving into early global, where you start seeing chances for world wars, real world wars, like World War I, World War II, hopefully not World War III. That will start happening. And none of these things transition exactly from one day to the next. Like I'm industrial today and tomorrow we're in early global. It'll start to ease in near the end of one age into the next. But early global is where you're starting to get more travel between countries, especially countries much further away, like the United States to Japan rather than the United States to Canada. Then there's global. Global is the idea of you have this one connected world. Things are moving from Japan to North America is like not even a thought of how it happens anymore. It just happens pretty much in all areas of societies. Some societies in the world might be further behind others, but that's just the way things evolve. Solar system. Now, this could start happening at any point before then, but it's really important to think of it in this terms when your world can travel between planets or moons or parts of the solar system. It's very limited still, but you're reaching out to new terrain. It's almost like the exploration era on Earth over again when you can do that. There might or might not be interaction with other alien creatures at that time. That all depends on the solar system. And ours, probably not. However, you'll only figure that out as you go. But it's an important period of time because you probably have some form of space travel, but it's very limited. And then there's short interstellar, like going from here to Alpha Centauri. You're talking about, it might take a long period of time. Maybe you're moving at the speed of light, but your race can hibernate for long periods of time, or you can freeze yourself, or whatever reason, you can travel short interstellar distances. And it starts to open up the universe a bit more. You have to be careful once interstellar travel becomes possible. If you don't want them to get to any spot in the universe very quickly, you have to try and find a way to limit that in your world rules, or else, they might just go in the wrong direction. Instead of going to Alpha Centauri, they go in the other direction, and you don't even have a world developed for there. And you can just swap your solar systems or not. Maybe you get stuck and the story breaks down. So you have to be kind of careful when you deliver stories through your world that once you reach interstellar travel, it becomes very hard to know where your players are going unless you have very strict rules on how they can do it. However, maybe you want to go bigger. You want to go to universal travel. They can pretty much go to any galaxy they want to, anywhere they want to, very easily. And you have some of the same rules problems you do with interstellar travel, but it's on a much larger scale. Or maybe multi-universe, this idea that you have all these parallel universes together, people can go between them. That's another important thing to consider too. Are you going to play it where it's similar to the world they're in, but maybe some of the elements are different and some are closer to the world they're from than others? It's a quick way to do it. And if you're not using technology to do it, this stage especially can happen at any point, but has major impacts on your world. So if you're a multi-universe where they can travel between universes quickly, or my final stage, extra-dimensional, which they can travel to other dimensions, whether they be supernatural or whatever dimensions you could dream up, or if you go to science and take some of the theoretical dimensions and use those, that's up to you. But what's the impact and interaction between those dimensions? How do you do that? To me, it becomes very difficult at this point, but people do tell stories in extra-dimensional world. So good for them. And if you're one of those people, you have to understand where you kind of fall in the scale of different ages. Now, and you also have to consider too, if you're at the border between ages, what's the impact? And a great example here is if you look at this group in the Mediterranean called the Sea Peoples. And they kind of came up at the beginning of the Iron Age. And you have two major empires in the Middle East, like Egypt and the Hittites. And they're very powerful at this point, and they seem like they are superpowers of the age. However, these Sea Peoples come along, they use iron weapons, and the Hittites and the Egyptian empires, they typically did not. They didn't like iron because it was a lot easier to make weapons out of, which in theory sounds good, but the problem is if you start making weapons out of iron, then civilians can afford them. The people who pay you taxes, who are supposed to look up to you, or will have the ability to get these things easier as well. So if you keep using bronze, which is much more expensive to make, much more difficult, it helps keep the technology of the military in the hands of the people who rule. The Sea Peoples didn't have these qualms, and the Hittite Empire basically disappeared. Egypt was beaten back. It took a long time to come back from. And it sort of spawned iron becoming the predominant weapon/tool material of the day. Now, The other things you have to think about too is if you start incorporating magic is what is the impact of magic on these things? Like, do I reach a global system of travel in an Iron Age or a Bronze Age or a Stone Age? Much simply because magic has the ability to transport people over vast distances over time. And if you have this sort of idea of teleportation in your world, why aren't they doing it if it's possible? Maybe they haven't figured out how to do it yet. But if they do, what will be the impact, the social changes that would occur from that stuff? And a lot of times that's the great time for stories are, what happens to Joe if all of a sudden someone appears in his living room? There's some great ideas of stories that can be told with magical breakthroughs affecting different ages of worlds. What if the Americas been cut off from Europe, Africa, and Asia for so long if people could teleport? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the rules for how the magic works. That's why the rules are important. And sometimes what you'll find is as you're going through making these decisions, you're going to have to go back and add more rules because, wait, the impact of this could risk this stuff, so I need rules to deal with what happens. I need to have a better filter for my world. So this is also a basic topic. You need to know what the technology is, how they achieve it, if technology can be improved upon by magic, what limits it from becoming an interstellar empire with stone weapons. So those are things you need to think about. And so the world building task for today, it's quite simple. Just determine the technology of your world. This you'll pretty much want to limit if you do a universe to a world by world basis. And if you want to get really specific, a region by region or a culture by culture or a country by country basis. Because, even if you look at Earth today, you might have people who aren't really in a global society, but have some of the benefits from it, but not all of them. And you have to deal with that with your countries as you use them in your world. And now the real world task for today, and I'm going back to my favorite one, write another note for your loved one. Just let them know that you love them. Just put it somewhere that they're going to find it, and they're going to find that note. They're going to feel a little bit better about themselves. They're going to see you at your computer, and they're not going to worry that you're talking to some other person they don't want you to talk with, or worried if your relationship's in struggle. Really, and it's very important. At least once a week, try and do it every day. Let the person that you love know that you love them. And now, here comes the big tease. The big tease for our next episode is a makeover session. And that's a really lame name that I need a better name for. But really what I want to do is I want to take the first few steps we've gone over, and I'll talk about my world, and I'll talk about specifically what are some of the elements that I've chosen and why. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardual.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.